This is what we're checking out today. Wow, that thing is f***ing enormous. Today we're talking about the PlayStation 5. I got mine on launch about 3 months or so ago. Would have been November 12th, so it's end of January. Yeah, just under 3 months. The model that I got is the digital edition, so no disc drive. I got this primarily because most of the games that I was buying for PlayStation 4 were all digital anyways, so I knocked off an extra $100, and I actually like the look of the digital edition a little bit more than the regular one with the disc drive. So let's start off things with some stats for all the nerds out there. This is the largest console that Sony has ever made, weighing in at 9.9 pounds. It is 15.4 by 4.1 by 10.2 inches in size. On the front of the console, you have a USB-C and USB-A port. On the back, there is 2 USB-A ports, 1 Ethernet, and 1 HDMI 2.1 port. The processor is an AMD Zen 2 CPU that runs at 3.5 gigahertz, and there is an AMD RDNA 2 GPU with ray tracing, and that's capable of producing 10.28 teraflops. There's 16 gigabytes GDDR6 memory and a 825 gigabyte NVMe SSD with 667 gigabytes that's actually usable. This can potentially run 4K resolution at 120 frames per second with some games. So just some thoughts on the design. This does not look like any other Sony console that we've seen before, or really any other piece of electronics that's out there right now. Well, except for maybe an air purifier, according to this guy. When I first got it, I did find the design was a little bit weird. I didn't know if I really liked it or not. It sort of reminded me of a scaled model of a stadium or something like that. But really the biggest drawback, even though the design might be a little bit awkward, actually isn't the aesthetics themselves. It's just the sheer size of the console. So I was going to put this into my media unit and I had to make room for it. I had to take out some shelves and I was doing some testing to see what the airflow is like. And the console just wasn't sitting right. It was just taking up too much space and it was running a little bit hot. So like a lot of other people probably had to do, I did have to find another spot for this, but luckily I had an empty space sitting right beside the media unit that I could put it into. The only downside was that the provided HDMI cable that Sony gave was just a little bit too short. So I did have to order another HDMI 2.1 cable and run that. And then after that, I was ready to go. It does seem kind of short-sighted on Sony's part to not include a longer HDMI cable. With the one provided, you can't really go that far away from the TV, and with how big this console is, it just doesn't really make sense that they wouldn't have given you an extra 5 feet or so. I would say in comparison, the Xbox Series X is probably a little bit easier to place, but it is definitely a more conservative design. But after dealing with the size and placing this and getting it up and running, over time the design actually has grown on me a little bit. The lighting is one of my favorite things design-wise on the console. The illuminated strips along the edges really look great. It is subtle and it does have the same color patterns as you're used to seeing on the PS4. So in that way it's familiar and predictable. You're gonna get the blue, the orange, and the white lights. All right, so moving on to performance and gameplay. I have not played a ton of different games on here because I'm pretty busy with a lot of other things, but there's 2 games that I have played quite a bit of, that being Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Madden 2021. I've also played a few demos and I've played a few PS4 games as well, and I've toyed around with Astro's Playground, which is a really neat game to kind of go over how the controller works, and I will touch on that a little bit later. One of my main gripes about this console, now that I'm talking about games, is the storage space is quite small small. There's only 667 usable gigabytes out of the gate here, which isn't the biggest considering that most of the games that come out now are enormous and can be anywhere between 50 to 100 gigabytes. So it doesn't really leave you a lot of room if you want to have a large library stored on the console itself. There is expandable storage capability in the PS5, but to the best of my knowledge, that isn't currently available right now. You can use external drives and format them to store PS4 games if you want. And if you use an external SSD, load times are still going to be faster than on a PS4 or a PS4 Pro. And speaking of load times in general, they are significantly shorter than the PS4 and the PS4 Pro. You can notice this most when you're playing a PS4 game where you have some frame of reference to compare it to. So when I got my PS5, I was playing Fallen Order on my PS4. So I fired up the PS5, threw it on there, and everything was noticeably faster. There is a huge leap in performance over the PS4 Pro. You are going to get higher frame rates, better image textures, resolution, and ray tracing. And for those of you who don't know what ray tracing really is, all you really need to know is it produces a little bit better lighting in the game scenes. And just to be clear, you're not gonna see all these improvements in PS4 games, but you will see them when you move to actual PS5 games. The jump is really evident, you can notice it right away. And one thing that's really exciting is it's still early days, so it's gonna be neat to see when developers start to push the hardware a little bit more. We're still kind of in an in-between stage where most people are on the last generation of consoles and things aren't really optimized for PS5 and Series X yet. I definitely needed to carve out a section in this video to talk about the controller, because to me that's one of the best parts about this console. The DualSense controller is leaps and bounds above the DualShock 4 controller. It does feel way better in the hands than the DualShock 4. It's a lot rounder, it doesn't have as many square edges, and it just feels like it's filled out or a little bit bigger. I can use this for long periods of time without my hands or my thumbs getting sore, and I can get around 12 hours battery life on a single charge depending on what features the game is utilizing in the controller. And just going over some of those features, the haptic feedback is amazing on these controllers. I guess controllers haven't really had much innovation when it comes to vibration or rumble, and it's not something that you would really think about, I guess, but when you pick up the PS5 controller, you can almost immediately notice the difference. So for instance, when I'm playing Madden, you can feel the footsteps moving left and right on each side of the controller in pretty much every sudden movement. The vibration is just much better than on the DualShock 4, and it seems like it's really precise. The speaker implementation in some games is useful. Madden uses it for on-field sounds, so you can hear your quarterback making play calls, and it just feels a little bit more immersive. And to me, the best feature on these controllers is the adaptive triggers. So these triggers can actually change tension in-game programmatically. It's really cool. I notice it quite a bit in Valhalla when I'm drawing a bow or something like that. We're probably going to see this a lot in first-person shooters. And as I mentioned earlier, Astro's Playground is an awesome way to see what this controller is capable of. It is a free game that's included with a PS5. Just kind of showcases all the controller features, and it's really fun to play. Highly recommend throwing this on if you're just unboxing your PS5. Alright, and final thing I wanted to talk about was the UI, which is a little bit of a breakaway from the PS4 dashboard. So some of the layout at first glance seems pretty familiar. And for me at first, because it did feel similar to the PS4 with these scrolling horizontal tiles, I found it restrictive. This is probably because I just wasn't used to it and I was expecting it to be exactly like the PS4. Once you do get used to navigating around a little bit, I do find that most things can be accomplished with less clicks and there's less touch points. So the UI is more rounded than previous PlayStation dashboards, and they've kind of moved away from the square elements and the blue backdrop seen on the PS4. I find that the UI complements the design of the PS5 body. Everything seems to be moving towards a more rounder, softer aesthetic. Even if you don't like the console design itself, it is definitely unique to everything else that's out there. I do have to give Sony props. It is easy to get caught up in copying current design trends and whatever's popular at the time. This does really stand out. The UI doesn't stand out as much this way, but it does feel like an extension of the case design. Everything just seems a little bit less generic, and there's enough similarities here to tell that it is a Sony product. The fact that the controller, the case, and the software all kind of fit together is really impressive and well thought out. So that's where I currently stand on the PS5. I am loving it so far. There was a few headaches initially with the size and the placement and ordering HDMI cables and setting everything up, but once I got past that, it's been great. I know that these are hard to come by right now, but if you can get your hands on one, I don't think that you'll be disappointed. Just make sure that you plan out a space to put it and that it gets enough airflow, and don't tell your wife that it's an air purifier. So that's it. Do you have questions, concerns, comments? You might be entitled to a large cash settlement. No, you're not. But if you have those, leave them down below. If you enjoyed this video, like it. If you want to see more, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.